Breakfast with Bob.
Welcome, everybody, back to Breakfast with Bob. My name is Bob Babbitt. We are brought to you by the PTO, the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix, Normatec, Form Goggles, You Can, and our Challenged Athletes Foundation. It's been 27 years since we started CAF. We've now sent out 30,000 grants, raised $123 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport, and a gentleman who has joined us at the San Diego Triathlon Challenge before, Mr. Pete Jacobs. How you doing, Pete?
Hey, Bob. I'm doing great. Thank you very much. I've had a lovely ride this morning and a social coffee afterwards. So, yeah, good spirits.
I love it. And 2012 Ironman World Champion. When you look back at your career in over 30, probably 35 Ironman races, that's obviously the ultimate achievement, is to win the Ironman World Championship. Anything even close to that?
I think second the year before was actually really close in my memory because it was such a battle with Andreas Raelert to get that second place. That emotionally and physically, I went so much deeper in 2011 that the feeling of crossing the finish line was so emotional to come through that pain and be in the zone. And I've got such great memories of being in the zone, so much so I learned so much from that second place. And it's the deepest I've ever dug. It's I went to places I've never been before or after. So second place is actually a pretty close memory for me.
Well, and especially I remember talking to you about that race, and you could pinpoint certain moments that, okay, when Crowe made his move, when Craig Alexander made a move, I was too far back and he got away, and that was basically the race. And you learned from that, and that helped you for next year, right?
Yeah, I basically did that the next year. I got away on the bike. It was only like 45K in or so. There was a group of us that got away about 5 or so, and I just felt great. And it was actually Crowe that let that split happen. So I sort of went through, made my move at the right time, and Crowe's back was seizing up that year. And when I went round him to bridge the gap to a few guys ahead, that was when Crowe sort of, well, I can't push now. It's starting to seize up. And everyone sort of was watching him, multiple world champ. And that gap happened and it didn't come back. So I got off the bike, the lead of that front little group, because that split up again. And only Marino Voenacker in front. And then 5 minutes, the next group, which was the Chasers, which was Andreas Raelert, again, was up there. And, so it was sort of what Crowe had done the year before to guys like me and in the pack that I was in, that 5 minute lead off the run. It's difficult to bridge that after a solid bike ride.
Well, and it's funny because a lot of guys have gotten to second place and not won the race. I mean, Raelert's done it a number of times. When you have that opportunity to finally win that thing, how important was it to you to, okay, I haven't won this before. I've won other races. There's really no reason why it can't be me winning here.
Yeah, that was the mindset going in the day before, or a couple of days before, in interviews with ASICS, my sponsor then. I was very relaxed and calm when I look back at those interviews, and it's very much, I knew what I had to do. I knew I was in good enough shape. I knew strategically when to make moves, be patient, don't get a drafting penalty or a blocking penalty really is the risk when you're stuck out wide. And just don't do anything silly and stick to the plan. And that was it. But I felt good on the bike. And so that was different to previous years, where on the bike, I had a bit more power. I went with that breakaway confidently. And I was even leading the race for a little bit along the rolling hills before we sort of climbed up to Harvey, and was overtaken by Voenacker somewhere around that point.
So when you win that race, how does that change your world? Because there's a huge difference between being second and winning that thing.
Yeah, it changed things that I did travel a little bit more the following year and went to some other events and races, and that recognition and sponsorships and things were great. It definitely made a change in lifestyle a bit. But I mean, the real change was probably that I was getting older. I was pushing my body harder, and health was never 100%. And, I just started to pay the price for getting that stress levels constant throughout my lifetime. And it just got harder and harder to get back to peak shape again.
What I find it fascinating, because you and Ryan Hall were both with ASICS at like the same time.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I look at Ryan and you guys, very similar type of athletes. And
Mm.
from 2007 to 2011, I think he ran either 9 or 10 marathons, all of them between 204.59 and 212. Like we're talking world-class performances, 10 of them in 4 years. And for you, you did 30 some Ironmans from the age of 21 to 31.
Mm.
When did you get to the point where you felt like my body is just not coming back the way it used to?
Well, it never really was amazing. You know, I had a bit of fatigue issues since I was a teenager. And then it was more the feeling of fatigue that might be a day or so. And I could manage that and train for Hawaii and do all right and just not push when I felt a bit tired. But after that, it developed more in other manifestations. And so muscle weaknesses. So it wasn't so much that, you know, I didn't feel great, but maybe my muscles were weaker and that was causing a bit of a weakness in my back or my glutes. And then suddenly you're seizing up because you can't push and activate as well. And that's when it starts to really affect what was going on. You know, the up and down a little bit I could handle, but then when your body starts to have these ongoing imbalances, that leads to bigger issues. And yeah, it was around that point, probably I was in really good shape a year later. In 2013, I raced the Sunny Coast 70.3 about 4 weeks before Kona. And that was one of my best, probably it was my best half Ironman that I've ever done. And I rode really strong power, ran comfortably, and that was a great race. But then that back issue was sort of there, that unevenness, and that was what sort of pulled me back in 2013. And then the fatigue got into bigger bouts of fatigue as time went on. And it's really became quite difficult to do anything consistently for more than about 6 weeks before I'd find myself in a pretty big hole of fatigue again. And so that sort of was the pattern. I'd feel fantastic. 6 weeks, I can do anything. I can win Kona again. I can race these races overseas. And then by the time the races came around, I'd be a bit fatigued. I'd dig myself into a really big hole through all that excess stress of the racing. And then I'd sort of take 6 weeks to get out of it. And that was the cycle that I was in. And yeah, relating to Ryan, you know, I chatted to him a couple of times, and definitely similar trajectories of like, okay, we're trying to figure out what it is that's causing these fatigue issues.
Right.
And I think I was really invested in it. Like I really wanted to find out what was going on in the body, because that was what I've always done as an athlete. Was I want to do Hawaii and do it well, because I want to know how good my body can be. What are my limits? And when the fatigue and issues became more of a problem, that was another focus, right? What is it that, how does the body work, and how do I find out how to get the most out of my body? And I think I just approached it a bit more methodically. I was a bit more vested into, right, how do I fix this? What is it? I don't want to know like, it's just low testosterone, or it's just, you know, you're training too hard. I want to know what is actually causing this excess stress that's causing these symptoms. And so talking to people like Dr. Phil Maffetone and, you know, and Phil definitely mentioned at one of our conversations that he would have liked to have worked with Ryan Hall. He believed he could have helped him as well. And so yeah, anyway, but it's been a long journey and many years. It's not just Phil, it's been many, many other people that I've learned from. But yeah, figuring out how the body works is kind of my passion now. But let's say COVID clears up. Let's say I continue getting stronger as I am. And, you know, maybe 2022, we'll see if we can get back on a start line.
So is that the goal? Do you feel like that you still have something left and want to? Now, are you talking Ironman? Are you talking just getting back and doing short races? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I still think if my body's feeling really good, I can run really well. I love running and I love doing the marathon off the bike in Hawaii. You know, I'm doing hot Bikram and hot yoga and hot Pilates, which is basically, they're all just strength workouts in a hot little room.
Right.
And that feeling of the sweat dripping off me and pushing your body, holding a plank and when everything's shaking, I love that. And it feels like Hawaii. And it's reminding me of why I love the heat. I love that feeling of humidity. And it is sort of making me think, hey, even if it takes a couple of years to really be confident in my body and get the strength and everything worked out, then there's no reason why not to. But it's not a goal at the moment. The goal is working on our business, which is passing on all this knowledge that Jamie and I have learned. And the other goal is continuing to learn about the body and, so build the business and then see what happens once racing begins again. And certainly it's not something I would do half-assed, as you say.
Right.
It would be right. If we want to do this, it's to get back to a podium spot in Hawaii and run a sub 240 marathon and do it properly. But that takes a full-time commitment. And I'm not in a position to do that at the moment. I don't want to do it. And I'm happy for COVID to happen and just take a back seat. And I'm just doing social rides, all these gym workouts in a hot environment, and just staying in touch with fitness and strength and still continually getting to know my body more and learning more.
So after you win in Kona, obviously any race you go to, people are expecting Pete Jacobs to be a factor. Pete Jacobs is going to win. Ironman World Champion is here. The other athletes are feeling that and thinking that. How long did it take before you knew that, you could feel that pressure? Were you able to deal with that when you maybe knew your body wasn't quite ready?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it didn't really weigh too much on my mind that I had pressure or expectations so much. No more, not enough that it was louder than my own wants and desires. And my own wants and desires were that I wanted to get the limits of my body and find out how I can be stronger, how I can be faster, and how I can feel better and more energetic just day to day and in training and everything else. So yeah, I didn't hear those pressures in my own mind any more than just what I wanted out of my own body.
So during this last number of years, what have you discovered about your body? Because you've done everything. You've gone meat diet and veggie diet and air diet and you name it. You have been that guinea pig out there trying everything. What has worked and what hasn't worked?
Yeah, well, definitely cutting back on all the foods other than kind of the meat, fish, and eggs is good. Like I definitely have lots of reactions in my gut to the higher amounts of lectins and oxalates, and that's relevant by the aches and pains that will be worse in one morning than another morning if I've had some more plants and more other foods, and then generally, and my skin will still flare up a little bit. And so I do go off, I'm not 100% carnivore, meat, fish, and eggs. I do like to taste other things and keep it interesting, but I do know there are times when that's gone a bit too far and I'll feel it for maybe a couple of days. But generally, the biggest things is, yes, getting to bed early. So I really need the recovery. So I'm really careful around my blue light factors and getting to bed on time and early. Eating really meat, fish, and eggs mostly, with flavorings, herbs, and a couple of spices and things, but pretty minimal. And minimal greens, or veggies of any type, really minimal, nothing processed, and no chocolate. Oxalates in the cacao powder can be a bit of a factor. No dairy, definitely no dairy. So there's a few big things that really I've taken out that make the most difference, but I still experience the small flare-ups when I have a little bit of something here and there that's off. And that's just, my guts, my cells are not strong enough to be resilient to those other plant toxins. And so, that's still something that I follow, and that's been fantastic. But in that process of becoming and testing carnivore and now still being basically zero carb in my diet, it's basically zero carb. I've become incredibly well fat adapted, like more so than ever before, more so than probably most other athletes that are in any sport at the moment, because there's not many athletes doing a zero carb diet. And I just feel fantastic when I am on zero carb, when I am out there exercising, or I'm doing a few days a week landscaping work, just a few days a month, sorry. And so I rode yesterday morning, rode for a couple of hours, had a quick, meat breakfast, went and worked hard for 6 hours, no lunch break, and worked through the sun, and then come home, and then I went out to hot Pilates and then have dinner at the end of it. So my energy levels and my ability to burn fat is just so good now. And the other week I went on a 5-hour mountain bike ride, solid efforts. And again, no breakfast, no nothing, just didn't have anything till lunch. And that ability to perform at a high level and work hard, but still be fat burning and not run out of any fuel source is a fantastic feeling. And I know that if I can bring that back into an elite level of training and performance and racing, that there's definitely a lot of other boxes that I would tick in terms of, the way that I would approach it, the way that I would approach nutrition on race day, other supplements, other modalities of improving that at that level. And but at the moment, it's fantastic to be so well fat adapted that I can train hard, work hard, and feel good all the time, and know 100% that it has nothing to do with how many carbohydrates I'm eating or not eating, as most athletes will still want to tell me that it is, you've got to have carbohydrates to have energy. And, it's just, there's so many nuances to how the body works, and you can train your body to do what you want it to do. That's the bottom line. Everybody, yes, if you're eating carbs, you're going to feel better on carbs. If you're eating low carb, you're going to feel better on low carb. So that's just, you train your body to adapt what you want it to do.
What's fascinating when you talk about that is back in the early days, it was Thursday night carbo loading before the Ironman, right? Pierogies and pasta and all that stuff. I never felt good on race day, right? I always felt like I had this big gut bomb going on. It was only after I realized, well, maybe I'm different, and I need, for me, like salads and eating light before a race always felt better. So it's like everybody's body is different.
But it makes sense if you've been training your body to be a good fat burning machine, as you do when you train long hours for Ironman. Even if you're having carbohydrates, you're still training your body to burn fat in those long extended training. And so to then suddenly go and back off your training. And so your body isn't as insulin sensitive as it is when it is training those big miles. And so you're rested, your body's kind of, getting ready. And then you have this huge amount of carbohydrates, which it's not just the carbs. It might be that it's processed. It might be that it's lectins, and it might be that it's gluten, which is a lectin. And then it might be that you've had the pasta, plus you've been having Gatorade all day, and you're on top of this. So you could actually be experiencing a couple of days of insulin resistance almost. And suddenly you've got a bit of extra inflammation. You're carrying extra water because you're storing all of this extra water weight because of the high levels of blood sugars. That's affected your kidneys and your water balance and all of those sort of things. There's so many things that come into it, and it's been fascinating, and I'm still got so much more to learn. But I've been able to speak to some really, really smart guys on our podcast, but also privately, some amazing doctors and guys that are, really fascinated in this whole, what is energy and how do we get the best health and the best energy and combine them both into a high performance machine as well on top of that.
So can an athlete at the level that you are racing at, can you coach yourself? When I look at it, pretty much every elite runner, triathlete, cyclist, they've got someone coaching them, because a lot of times the coach might take a workout out. They sort of could read the athlete, sometimes better than the athlete can read themselves. Looking back on your career, did you have coaches that were helpful? And did you get to a point where you felt that you would be better coaching yourself?
Yeah, I pretty much always coached myself. Especially around that, years of top 10s in Hawaii. It was self-coached. I was on a run program that was from a book, and I followed that for quite a few years. And my cycling was just solo out on my own for the long rides. And I had a mentor though that would give me, some good advice and how to get mindset right and that quiet confidence, how to build that quiet confidence. And that's key when you are, training for Hawaii, that quiet confidence of being out there solo. So it's not ego that you're pushing and going too hard and sprinting up a hill on a 5-hour ride. It's about consistent pace and consistent calmness and building that resilience. And yeah, for me, a coach never worked because I'd had those fatigue issues.
Yeah.
I was not comfortable with somebody ever questioning me, saying, well, why'd you miss that workout? Or your wattage wasn't good. We're not in the right position that we should be in at this point in time on this session, on this day, 3 weeks out from the race. Whereas for me, I knew that I had no ego. I'd learned to control ego because of all those years of fatigue. So those years of fatigue meant that I knew that I had to go easy when I was feeling tired. And so, if I was ever with a couple of people on the bike, which was very, very rare, I would often get dropped because, I wasn't going to be able to push high wattage up a hill, but I could do moderate wattage all day long, and I'd go and do that on my own. So didn't like training with people, didn't need a coach because of that excess kind of negative feedback. And I think a coach works best at the elite level if you are seeing the athlete. If you can actually look at their body language and coach them through body language, mindset, like day to day, session to session. Is this just a feeling of fatigue because you're worried about something else and we need to do a bit of mindset training? Or is it that you are actually at an overload point of stress? And whether it was, you've been training really hard, you've had poor sleep, and you've done something else. Like the age group athletes I work with, it's often they've eaten bad food, they've had a few nights of alcohol, and then suddenly they miss 2 or 3 days of training. And it's an obvious cycle that happens. And so I think unless you are seeing your coach regularly, it's not something you can do at an elite level. It's quite difficult, I would say. But then for athletes that want just that little bit of feedback, that don't have any issues like I had, that aren't on the limit all the time of breaking down, then yeah, sure, they can just get sent wattage numbers and they'll do it to a T, and they'll be able to repeat sessions week in, week out, as they can. But for other athletes that need that more, you should take a day off. You should miss this session. We should train on something else today, or just reading posture and things like that. Then yeah, being in person does count. And, that may have worked for me if somebody had been in Noosa when I was here in 2012. But I really just like doing my own thing. And it was only ever for about, 2 to 3 months of the year where it was like, all right, let's train for Hawaii, July, August, September. And so it wasn't really that long. And I just put my head down and focused for those 3 months. And yeah, it was able to do it on my own in terms of writing the program. I had a weekly structure and just followed that weekly structure.
A lot of it, most athletes usually go through they start out doing sprint races, then they move to Olympic, and then 70.3. I mean, you did your first Ironman, were you 21? Something like that? I think
I was 20 years old, I think.
Yeah, 20 years old. Do you think that when I look at athletes who sort of overcook themselves, and I look back at a Scott Tinley who did so many Ironman races, and his adrenals, I think he pretty much fried those. And then a Rob DiCostello in marathons. I remember seeing him at races, and you could look in his eyes and know that he knows what it's going to feel like at mile 20, and he didn't really want to be there. You could sort of see there. Even Crowe, when you have 3 world-class performances, winning 70.3 worlds in 11, then setting the course record and beating you at the Worlds at Ironman, and then running 2:38 at Ironman New Zealand in March. So really in 6 months, he had 3 world-class performances, and I think he was pretty much done in terms of the Ironman distance. When you look back at your career, do you look back and go, maybe I should have done maybe a little less Ironman, 30-some Ironmans.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who's done most, elite marathoners never are running 30-some marathons.
Yeah. I think it's a small piece of the puzzle.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, life is so many different factors, Like I said, I was obviously getting a lot of issues and inflammation and things from my gut not being well resilient, which was basically a problem of my mitochondria not being in great health. And so then you get all these follow-on problems of breaking down and not being as resilient as you could be. And doing the Ironmans is a pretty small part of that, for that kind of one day of stress. Like I said, I only ever trained really well, I would say, for Hawaii each year in those 3 months. And the fact that I'd done a lot of Ironmans, it's a small piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole enchilada. There's a lot of factors that went into why my body just was breaking down. Like I say, I was breaking down and having fatigue issues as a teenager. And this what I now really focus on with our clients that we work with is getting their head around this overload approach. And it's like, yeah, sure, you can go and have a bit of a cheat meal, I guess, or you might have a late night party, or you could push your heart rate a little higher in training, but you can't add all of these things together in a short space of time. You can't then expect your performances to be great. You can't then have a really stressful day at work and then, you know, you've had bad food throughout work. It's really stressful. You've had tons and tons of coffee, and then you're having, you know, something else at home because you're so exhausted mentally. So this overload of stress. And so that's sort of what we just try and focus on and see the big picture. And that was the sort of learning from Phil Maffetone about the big picture. And, you know, now it's been fascinating because whenever I thought I kind of had a big picture view, let's say 2-3 years ago, a big picture view of how my body works, like that's now like a micro version of how I can see things working now. Like I've had to take 100 more steps back. And now I've stepped back as far as being able to look at things in the sense of the elements, the atoms that create our world and our bodies, and learning about the periodic table of elements and our universe and all the factors that do come into play with what we have evolved with over the last, you know, couple of billion years. It's quite fascinating how you can see that size of the big picture, you know, how you can really see that why we need the electrolytes that we need, why we need to get the sleep we need, why we need to be in circadian rhythm with the sun and not up late on the computers. Like, you know, why all these things help us and why we feel better when we're doing these things. And, you know, so that's the big picture view, factoring all the things that can help add stress to this issue of overload that you just want to avoid.
Well, another thing that's fascinating to me, I look at certain coaches, like Luc Van Leerde, two-time Ironman World Champion. He had a lot of injuries in his career. And I think because of that, he's become a better coach because he's able to look at his athletes and make sure they don't overdo it and overcook themselves like he did to himself. Has this all made you a better coach?
Yeah, definitely. Just being able to see when somebody says, I'm not feeling great and this is what's happening. And it might, and it's hard work. Like it's tiring because I look at things as a coach very, very empathetically. I want to feel what they're feeling. So, you know, I'm looking through their comments on Training Peaks, and if they haven't made a comment, I'm like, okay, you've done your watts, you've said it went well, but that doesn't tell me how you felt during it. Like, could we have dug a bit more, or did we need to focus on a different muscle group, or what was the mindset during it? So yeah, it's getting empathetic with what they're feeling is a big part of it, and getting to know the obvious stuff. Like, you know, what was it? Was it those 3 or 4 nights on holiday with extra wine every night, plus the buffet breakfast that you were eating, the gluten that you don't normally eat, as one of my athletes has just done last week? And, you know, he needed 2 or 3 days off. And after his holiday, he needed time off. He came home feeling terrible from it. And one hard hilly run. And the hills really, you know, muscle breakdown, CRP levels go up as we've experienced in the past. So his stress levels and inflammation. So yeah, you see patterns of forming, and then you just try and remind them of these patterns. Like, okay, well, that's what you did last time. You've done it again. We need to avoid that. Are you keeping your electrolytes up? Focus on this, go to bed early, and you'll be good to go in a day or two. Like, move on from it. Like, don't dwell on the past. And that's what definitely I learned that. You've got to be in the moment. And that goes for racing and training and life. You've just got to be in the now and not keep beating yourself up about, oh, well, I did that. Now I feel rubbish for 2 days. I shouldn't have done that. Now it's like, nope, accept the consequences of what you've done. And that's what we're trying to teach all the people we work with is we're not telling you what to do, but we're telling you what happens when you do what you do. And then you can go and make those decisions. And yes, you can go and live life loud and do crazy stuff for a couple of days when you want to, but just accept knowingly that we've taught you what's going to happen and you are going to probably feel like this for a couple of days. So accept it. Don't feel guilty. Don't complain to us about it. Don't, sort of beat yourself up constantly. You need to just accept it, move on, focus on something else for a couple of days, and then get back into it. And yeah, so that's a big part of it. Don't carry the guilt. Be in the now. And that's a big part of mindset for racing as well. Be in the now so that you can get into the zone of don't worry about how far I've still got to go. Don't worry about how hot it is. Don't think how far you've come or how many hours you've been going. None of that exists. The only thing that needs to exist is moving forward, just one step at a time and be in the present moment and let your body relax and just let everything just do what you've trained it to do.
So from 2007 to 2012, you had Crowe won 3 times, Macca won twice, and you won. Aussies dominated, right? We went from 2007 to 2012. What was it? Why? All of a sudden, the Aussies were dominating everything.
Oh, it's just a coincidence, I think. Very much a coincidence that we just happened to have those good 6 years. That maybe the Germans weren't as strong in that period, but obviously Andreas Raelert was right there, and seconds and thirds, like for almost every year that the Aussies won, he was on the podium. And but maybe just the dynamics of the race as well. But you know what? The dynamics never really change much. I'm one of those people that's like, look, it's just going to be a hard ride, and then it's a hard run, and that's pretty much what it's going to be. And there's a few Aussies that could have been close at certain times, but it's something about that race that you need. Like everybody that's done well, everybody that's on the podium or won it has gone into it and approached the race with supreme confidence. So it's not an egotistical overconfidence. It is that quiet confidence of I've got this. You can just walk up, you're on the start line and you're just like, I've got this, I've done it. And so you do what you need to do. Whereas the athletes that maybe haven't walked into that race with that confidence of I'm prepared to go when the pack goes. I'm not going to look at my wattage. I'm not going to watch heart rate. I'm just going to have supreme confidence and do what needs to be done to stay in this race. And yeah, I think we just haven't seen an Aussie competitor with that level of confidence on the start line in great shape yet. And so whether it's that little bit of lack of confidence that they overdo it in training beforehand and then they haven't quite got it in physically or mentally on race day, or it's just turning up in amazing shape but still holding back a little bit on race day. That's just where I see those small little gains, and like we're talking about small little things, but they become big things on the big island.
Yes, they do. So the goal is to eventually get back and do some racing. Is that important to you? And when you look at your career, multiple times in the top 10, multiple 240, 241 marathons, winning a world championship. That's a drop the mic career, right? 10 years, over 30 races. What's left to prove for Pete Jacobs, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, I do look to Mark Allen and Dave Scott, and I relate to them both in different ways. Obviously, the Mark Allen working with Phil Maffetone, aerobic, math, heart rate training, the spiritual side of it, the be in the now, quiet mind, all the stuff that he goes on. I love it. And then Dave Scott, I really relate to obviously how much he believes now that low carb is a better approach, a lower inflammation approach, a better fat burning, a better energy production, lower oxidative stress buildup throughout the race. So Dave and I would have very similar views now on how we would approach it nutritionally in a fairly similar ways. And also the fact that he came back after a few years off.
5 years.
And he was early 40s, and I'm 38 now, turned 39 at the end of the year. And so that I really enjoy, and I do want to get more out of my body. I'm not done pushing my body, because this whole like low carb, or zero carb, and becoming this well fat adapted, I haven't done a race at this level before. I haven't been in great shape, and with this level of energy efficiency, and I want to see what can happen. And I just got to work on a few of those imbalances and muscular imbalances and strength, and but also get to that point where I want to, like, I haven't been in a pool. I haven't swum in about 6 months nearly since March happened, and
yeah,
I think I've swum 4 times since March. But I'm enjoying doing all of these other strength sessions, and I'm getting fairly fit and strong just riding 3 or 4 times a week, and a bit of mountain biking, and I'm not running much at the moment either. And so there's a long way to go between now and getting back on the start line of an Ironman. But I do definitely have a burning instinct, like I did when I was 20 years old and I did my first Ironman as an age grouper. As soon as I crossed the finish line, I was like, yep, I want to be the best in the world at this. And that was coming from a really deep instinct that I could just feel, an intuition of, I think I can be the best at this thing that I've just done,
Yeah.
And I did it 10 years later. And now I do feel I still have an instinct in me that says, you can still be one of the best endurance athletes on the planet. And whether that's, maybe it takes me in a different direction. Like, I do eventually want to at some point be really good at ultra running. I'd love to do some great ultras. And I do still think, I still love that, getting off the bike and running a marathon at, that sort of 240 pace is what I want to do. And I definitely want to break 240 in a marathon off the bike. So those small goals add up to doing well in Kona, but doing well at Kona is not the goal.
Not the end goal. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how it was when I started, when I was getting top 10s in Kona. That's what it was. It wasn't about wanting to win. It wasn't like that's the end goal. The goal was, and always has been, to find out what my body can do, and how do I tap in? How do I connect to my body? And it's on a spiritual level almost. And that's why that second place feels so good to me, because I tapped into something that you don't get to tap into many times in your life. And at that level, I haven't been at that level ever again. And obviously winning, I felt great on the bike, and I was in the zone, and just to be leading and feeling so good, it does feel good. But yeah, so there's that spiritual side of the body's just humming. I'm in this level of the zone. And yeah, you're in a level and a state of mental clarity, of calmness and fitness and ability that, you only get in a few times in your life. And I still want to get there again in some way, shape or form. And like I said, that's the goal. The goal isn't necessarily what that race will be or what position I'll finish. It's just about seeing what the body can do and learning about the body.
It's funny you mentioned the whole Dave Scott thing, because 89, he takes second. And then every year we thought, okay, he's coming back in 90, 91, 92, 93, and he didn't get back until 94. And I'm looking at a poster that I have on the other side of the room here. It's called The Equalizer. And it's Mark and Wolfgang Dietrich and Rob Mackel out on the Queen Highway. And I remember bringing that, we produced those for after the 92 or 93 race. And Dave Scott, I said, hey, Dave, can you autograph this? And he wrote in front of Mark and Wolfgang and Rob, I'll be back, Dave Scott. And then the following year, he gets second, right? So there's never any limits to what I'm off. When with two kids were able to see what he did. Things work out the way you want them to work out. That would be awesome to have you back.
Yeah, well, we'll just see what happens. And like I say, I'm still on this journey for sure. Still on the journey, and there's a long time between now and the next big race for me. Anyway, like there's Cairns is probably going to be on in I don't know, it's probably only 6-7 weeks away or something like that. But I've got no interest in training for like a one-off race, because the commitment that it takes in an Ironman at a professional level is full time, and you can't get anything else done. No. And then there's still the chance that it gets cancelled. And so those sort of things, it's not in that, I'm not in that position, and I don't have sponsors that are paying me to race and compete. So, it really would be off my own back, and, that's quite an investment in itself to go and to prepare, like not just lost working on our business that we're Jamie and I are working on now, but then it's the expenses of licenses and ACOM and travel, and then it could all just get cancelled on the last day. So, mentally as well, that I'm not prepared to, because it's not something that I've been involved in for the last few years at that level. I'm not prepared to go to that level now in this kind of uncertain time. It's beyond my ability, I would say, to do that mentally at this point in time.
What I love is how much you've learned about yourself and how much you've grown as somebody who understanding athlete. You're understanding yourself, which is helping you understand the people you're coaching. That's a real art.
Yeah, it's a buzz when you get it right too. Like, when you write someone's program and they kind of say, "Oh, I think I kind of want to do this and this other group's doing," and then it comes to that time and it turns out you were right, and they, they either did the thing that you didn't suggest and then they fell in a hole, or they fall back and do what you did and then they end up feeling great, having a great session and a great performance. Or likewise with nutrition tips. Or when you can pick it and you're like, yeah, what are you doing with that thing that you're adding to your food journal? Let's take that out and see how it goes. They take it out, they feel better, IBS clears up and they can train better. And so, yeah, it's feel fantastic when you do kind of get these little, when you can read it right. And that's the buzz.
I love it. Hey, Pete, it's always so good to chat with you. We have the opportunity. We go on forever and ever and ever. I love the energy you bring. You seem like you're in a really good place, like you're really happy.
Yeah, I think the social coffee rides with the local Noosa guys are doing that for sure. I never did coffee rides when I was, training professionally. It was ride, get home, eat, stretch, recover, foam roll, sleep, on to the next thing. But now it's like, yeah, let's take 20, 30 minutes after our ride to have coffee and a chat and do that social thing, learn about other things going on in the world. And, that stuff that I didn't used to do or enjoy. And it's probably, I've probably just formed a habit of coffee, and, now it's the coffee that I'm stopping for as much as the social.
That is great. Hey, we'll give my best to James, and hopefully we'll, one of these days we'll be able to see each other in person again. That would be nice.
Yep, definitely will. Hopefully on the Big Island.
Love it. Pete Jacobs has been our guest. Thank you, Pete. Always a pleasure.
Cheers, Bob.